In today's lesson, we're going to take a closer look at dimensions and constraints. We'll also look at some methods for selecting and manipulating content, as well as several editing tools. Dimensions are elements which report sizes and distances in individual views. Dimensions show only in the view in which they were created, although they may be duplicated when creating a new view from an existing view by selecting the Duplicate with Detailing option. Constraints are non-view specific elements that allow you to create and lock in relationships between elements. Constraints may be defined with dimensions, such as a locked dimension distance, or with equal values, or with the Align tool. Constraints defined with dimensions may be retained even when the associated dimensions are deleted. There are two types of dimensions in Revit: temporary and permanent. Temporary dimensions appear as you are placing content or when an element is selected. Permanent dimensions are created by picking points or by converting a temporary dimension. If I select a window here, the window displays a couple of temporary dimensions, and we have a temporary dimension here that's showing to the outer face of this wall. The default location is going to be at the center line. The window is showing the dimension going to the center, and then we have a center of a wall here. If I select this wall, it shows a temporary dimension from the center line of this wall to the center line of the next wall over. If I select this door, this will show a temporary dimension going from the center line of a wall here to the center line of a wall here, and it's picking up again the center line of the door itself. The location, or the default positioning for those temporary dimensions, is going to be set in the temporary dimension settings. And if I go into my Manage tab and look under Additional Settings and then Temporary Dimensions, there's a little dialog box here that sets the default behavior for where your temporary dimensions will be measured from. By default, we're going to be getting the center lines of walls and the center lines of door and window openings. I can change this to pick up the faces of walls and retain the center lines of doors and windows, or I can change it to the edges of the openings and the faces of the walls. And I'll pick OK. And now if I select another window here and show the temporary dimensions, this time they're going from the opening to the face of a wall. If I select this wall, again we see temporary dimensions that are going from the face of the wall to the face of another wall here. And when those temporary dimensions are displayed, you can select that blue text and you can modify the value. And if I set this to 16, it's going to move the selected wall over that distance. Temporary dimensions can be modified, and we can convert them to permanent dimensions as well. If you would like a temporary dimension that is showing to the center line to go to the outer face instead, you can pick the little blue grip on the witness line, and as you pick it, it's going to cycle through the available points where it can be defined: the inner face, the outer face, or the center line. You can also pick and drag to the location that you want, and you can do that with the witness lines at either end. So I can pull this over to this point, pull this over to the outer face, and then we can say that we want this window to be 6 feet from the outer face to the edge of the opening. When a temporary dimension appears, you can convert it to a permanent dimension by selecting the little dimension symbol below the dimension. Here we're going to be able to create an individual dimension with either of these symbols, and here we'll create a set of dimensions. And if I pick this little blue symbol, we've just created a permanent dimension. Permanent dimensions can also be created simply by going to your Annotate tab and then selecting a dimension type and then defining the points for your dimension. So I can create an aligned dimension from this outer face to this face, and then reach my mouse out and pick a point to add that dimension. The command continues, and I can add more dimensions, and I can do another set here. I can go from the outer face to the center line of my window, to the inner face here, and then I'm going to pick my mouse out, and as you're dragging your cursor out, when you see the dimensions start to appear, you have to pick a point to establish the distance or the position for the dimension line. Sometimes people will say, I'm trying to add these dimensions and they keep disappearing. Kev, what's going on? I'm picking here, and then when I hit enter, well, don't hit enter. Just because it's showing, it's asking you now where do you want to place it. And if you look at the status bar down here, it says select references, then click in empty space to place the dimension. And if I click, it adds the dimension. If I can see the dimension appear, but I just hit enter, it just cancels that command and repeats the last command that I was running, and it brings up our temporary dimension properties. Now let's just delete a couple of these dimensions, and we'll come back here, and let's just look at this one dimension. So if I select this permanent dimension, a permanent dimension can be modified in the same way with regards to the positioning of the dimensioned elements. If I want this to go to the inner face, then I can pick and drag this into the inner face, or I can pick and drag it to the outer face. We can also click on the witness line to go to the cycle through the available points, either the center line or either side of the opening. And now when the dimension has appeared and you see it highlighted in blue, it's selected, but you're not going to be able to move elements by picking on the dimension text. If I want to be able to actually edit the dimension and have it move an associated element, I need to select that element first. So if I want this window to be exactly 6.5 feet and not 7 feet 15/16, I don't pick the dimension. Revit doesn't know what I want to change. Do you want to move this wall, or do you want to move this window? I need to actually pick the element that I want to change. And now I can edit the or location for my window by either editing the temporary dimension value here, this blue one, or I can pick the blue text on the highlighted dimension and I can change this. So we said 6.5 feet, so I'll type 6.5 and it's going to move it down to that location. Our permanent dimensions can be generated by selecting an element and then just picking the little blue symbol that appears below one of the dimensions. I can add a dimension here and I can make that permanent, and then I can select my window and set a distance here to 5 to move it over. If you see a pair of dimensions, as we do down at the bottom with a single symbol, if I pick this one, it's going to make a set of dimensions, and I'm just going to delete this inner dimension, and then I'll select my window and I'll change this value to 8 to shift it over to that distance. If I want this dimension to go to the outer face, I'm going to pick the little witness line and then drag it out to the correct location. Permanent dimensions can be created by converting temporary dimensions. Usually it's easier just to draw the dimension that you want. And if we look at the Annotate tab, we have several options. First of all, the easiest way to make most of your dimensions, typically you're going to be doing aligned dimensions, and the shortcut is DI. And if you just type DI and then start picking points and then picking a location, you can create the dimension in that fashion. You can also find that same aligned dimension tool on the quick access toolbar. So if you're on the architecture tab, you can access your DI here, and then you can choose a location and just pick a point to complete that command. If you go to the Annotate tab, you can find all of your dimension tools, and we have a linear dimension, and linear dimensions are not used nearly as often. Linear dimensions, instead of picking this face of a wall, they can be created by picking a point, and I can choose a point here and then a point here and then pick a point down here, and this is also going to create a dimension, but it's not going to be able to be modified in the same fashion that an aligned dimension would be. If I change this to 9, the other it's the temporary dimension that's forcing the linear dimension over. If I created that as an aligned dimension, and then I pick my window, the actual aligned dimension does show editable text that I can highlight and then use to move a selected element. Some of the other types of dimensions that can be created are radial or diameter dimensions. And let's see, if I draw a couple of walls off to the side here, let's just pick this and I'll do a create similar. And we'll just do a little angled section here. And we have an angular dimension, and this would let me pick two walls and then specify an angle between them. If we have a circular feature, if I make a detail line here, I can add radial dimensions, and I can add diameter dimensions to these elements. And again, I'll be able to change the sizes of these elements simply by selecting the element that I want to change and then picking the dimension. You don't pick the dimension first because it doesn't know what you want to change. And if you try to pick the dimension and then pick the dimension text, it brings up a dialog box that allows you to either replace the correct actual value or add information above or below it. So you can add a suffix such as TYP or typical, for example, and then apply and OK, and it's going to add a piece of text. That's what you use that dialog box for adding information equal, 6 foot equal, something like that. We'll just remove that one. You can add dimensions to individual faces. You can also add dimensions in a series by selecting an entire wall. And let's see how we can show this. Let's take this string here. This shows an intersecting wall on the inside and some openings on the outside. When I choose my Align Dimension tool, the options bar shows the ability for me to choose wall center lines, wall faces, center of core, or faces of core. And it will default to a center line. I'm going to change that to wall faces. If I look under my pick pull down, I can choose individual references, which is the default. I can also do an entire wall in one step. If I select individual references, the little options button is grayed out. If I change this to entire walls, now I have an options dialog, and this options dialog lets me choose what I want to dimension when I select an entire wall. And if all of these are cleared and I pick my entire wall and then drag my mouse out, it just draws a single dimension showing the entire thing. If I go into my options and say, well, I'd like to dimension this to the centers of my openings, and then pick OK, now when I select the wall and pull my mouse out and pick a point, it shows dimensions from the face of the wall here to the center of each opening. If I go to my options again and I choose the widths of openings, and then I pick this wall and drag my mouse out, this time we have a set of dimensions. Let's get rid of this set. We have a set of dimensions that are showing the overall distances for the openings and to the location for each opening. There's another option that allows me to pick up intersecting walls, and this would be more useful for an interior dimension. If I go back to my Align Dimension and I say that I want to pick entire walls, we'll go to Options and I'll clear my openings, and I'll say that I want to pick up intersecting walls, and then pick OK, and I can pick this, and I pull my mouse out, and this time it's showing the dimensions to the wall widths as well as the dimensions to the interior walls that are intersecting. So we can see that this is a 4 7/8 inch partition. and I'll just pick this and delete. So that's an automatic dimensioning command. After you've added a dimension, it's possible to lock that dimension so the value can't change. If I come in here and I add a dimension to this window, let's add an align dimension. I'm going to go from the center of the window, and then I'm going to set this to individual references, and I'll pick the face of the wall here. Now if I come in close, you can see that there's an outer wall face, and then there's another location down here, and that's showing the sill. And if I zoom in really closely, it's easy to pick the one that you want. If I try to pick the inner face of the brick, it's not highlighting. And if you want to cycle through available points or available faces, then you do it by pressing the tab key. Get close to what you want, and then press the tab key, and as you tab, it's going to highlight different faces. So now we're going to the sill, and now we go to the face of the wall. And a tab again, get close to the middle, and I can pick the center line. So I'll pick the face that I want, pick a point, and then drag my mouse out and place that dimension. And after you've placed any permanent dimension for a linear or angular dimension, you see this little padlock icon appear below the dimension segment. And if you pick the symbol and change it from an open padlock to a closed padlock, that is going to lock these dimensions in, so that this window is now going to be located 8 feet from the outer face, and you can't change it. If I try to change that location, if I try to pick my window and drag it down, or if I try to change this inner dimension here to 4 feet, then it's going to let me know that it can't change it to that value. It's an error that can't be ignored, and that's because there's a constraint that has been assigned to the outer dimension here. If I want to be able to move this window, I need to pick that padlock and unlock it. And after I've unlocked it, then we can change this value. That type of a constraint, that dimensional constraint, will also be displayed if I pick my window and I change this value to 8, and then I pick my dimension and I lock it. When I select this window, the padlock icon appears on the dimension. That's one way for me to recognize that there's a constraint. I also see this dashed line appear on the outside, and that dashed line is indicating a constraint between the outer face and this window. Locking a dimension segment creates a constraint between those two elements, and it makes it impossible to change that distance. If I delete this dimension, and it has a lock on it, and I try to delete this, I get a little warning. It's going to let me do this, but it's letting me know that a dimension with a lock or equal constraints is being deleted, but the elements will still be constrained. If I want to break away that constraint and remove it, then I can choose this unconstrained button. If I want to get rid of the dimension but keep that 8-foot constraint, then I can just pick OK. Now if I select my window again, I see a temporary dimension on the inside. I also see a lock icon appear here where the dimension used to be, and I see that dashed line indicating that constraint. And I can still unconstrain it by picking that lock. And now I've removed that constraint, and I can shift this window around again. You can also see constraints. If I lock this, let's see, I'll make this a permanent one, and I'll lock it, and I'll delete this, and I'll pick OK to leave that constraint in place. If I try to pick this window and move it up, I can't. If I try to shift it up, if I try to change this temporary dimension to 6, can't do it, can't change it to this value, so I'll pick cancel. There's an icon at the bottom here that says reveal constraints, and this was just added in Revit 2016. Other versions won't have this. And if I choose reveal constraints, it's going to show me any constraints that have been added, and then I can pick them, and I can either unlock them or I can delete them to remove those constraints. And now my window can be moved again. A second type of constraint which can be created with dimensions is one called an equality constraint. And an equality constraint allows me to create equal distances or center elements. If I add a dimension from this outer face to the center of this window to this outer face, and then I pick a point, you see the distances and you see the locks appear, and then there's a little symbol here with an EQ and a line through it. And if I pick that EQ symbol, that creates an equality constraint. And at this point, my window is going to be locked into the middle of this wall. If I change the wall location and I actually move this over from 16 feet to 15 feet, these dimensions will change. They still say equal, and that's because that window is still in the middle of the wall. If I pick this and I change this to 18 feet to narrow the bay, it automatically pushes that window over so that it maintains that equal constraint. You can do an equal constraint between multiple elements. I can set this up so that there are more windows. Let's say I'm going to do a create similar, and we'll add another window here, and we'll add another window here. And I'm going to pick this dimension and delete it, and we'll choose to unconstrain to remove those constraints, and I'll do a new dimension. We can also set this up and then pick a point, and I'll make these equal. And now again, if I were to change the location or the overall width, these distances are going to be maintained. Now, when I select a dimension that has equal constraints, if I look in the Properties palette, there's an Equality Display option. And this is set to Equality Text, which is just going to show the EQ. I can have it change to display the value, but still maintain the equality constraint. So now we see that we have 4'9" between each one. If I select this wall and I move this over to 16 feet, the equality constraint is retained and each of the distances is at 5'3". If I select this, there's one other option, and we can say that this is an equality formula, and then it's going to show an overall distance of 21 feet and indicate that we have an equal distance of 4 sections divided by into 21 feet. Usually we set this up to either show an equal text or a value like this. If I want to remove that equality constraint so that I can move two of these windows closer together, then I just zoom in and I pick the little EQ so that a line goes through it. And now I can select one of these windows, and I can say that I want this to be 5 feet. And I can pick this window and say that I want that to be 5 feet. If I choose this and say that I want them to be equal again, then it just shifts everything into that equal value. And I can set that back to a value here. You can move the witness lines for permanent dimensions by selecting the dimension and then clicking on these little boxes. You can also edit the witness lines, and you can add new features or remove witness lines. If I want to get rid of one of these witness lines so that I show 3 dimensions and leave the end one empty, which is more appropriate, then I'll choose the Edit Witness Lines, and then I can pick the one that I want to remove and pick a location. If I want to add a dimension line or a witness line to a dimension, let's say I want to change this so that it's picking up the center of my window as well, I'll choose Edit Witness Lines, pick up the location where I want to add that dimension line, and then just pick a point to finish. Pull that over, and if you want that in the middle, then we can just pick this dimension and make it equal, and it will force it into the middle. To reposition dimension text, let's find a small one here. Let's add a little dimension in here. I'll do an align dimension from here to here. And if you'd like to move that text and have it shift over a little bit, then I can pick my dimension and then pick, and I can drag this away and position it off to the side. And by default it will draw a little leader. That option is going to be shown on the options bar, and if I want to get rid of the leader, I just clear this option, and now I can move this around. And when I get it back to its default position, you can sort of feel it snap there, snap into position. And then when I drag it off, we can put it wherever we want. So that's how you can shift your dimension text around if required. We've looked at adding and deleting the equality. We've looked at adding and removing witness lines. Here, if I want to add another witness line here, I'll just pick Edit, choose a location. We can add witness lines the whole way along by editing and picking these values. And then if I want to adjust these dimensions, I can pick this whole string and drag it in. And if I want to change these values from one side to the other, I'm going to pick the object that I want to change, set a distance. So I'll say that that will be 6 feet to the center. And then I'll just move my way up, and I'll say that this next window is going to be 16 feet from the first. And the first one didn't change. And then I go to the next window up, and I'll say that I want this to be 10. And enter. And that's how you can modify your string of dimensions. So you start at one end and then work your way along. Alright, we're going to stop there, and when we come back we'll take a look at some methods for selecting and manipulating content.